Okay, I was asked if I could show a little something about capacitors, particularly changing them out. As I said, if you're going to use certain machines, so someone said, okay, well I have that liner, only the factory capacitor is a 47 and it's on a liner. Okay, well certain makers just use one type of capacitor for everything. Doesn't matter what company it is, if they use this or if they use 47 or if they use 22, 33, they only use one capacitor and they use it on all coils. Just like when they make coils, they make one wire length and they shove it into every different type of machine. What we're going to do is change out the coil and then make it nice and neat in a real cheap, easy way that looks good and is easy to do and has a custom fit, and I'll explain a number of ways to do it, but it's going to be cheap, easy, and look good. Now, these coils came out of this type of machine frame. Now, as I'm making these coils and I'm putting them on, I fit them on here, I trim the wire so that it goes exactly to the length that I need it to, so that it fits along the curves and hides behind everything nice and neat, so that you don't have wires and capacitors and shit hanging out all over the place. So the last wire that goes on is going to be the capacitor going from the front to the back. So we need to get that to fit customly. The only part about this is that these wires are only so long, and typically what you're going to end up doing is having to extend the wire, which means taking a little chunk of 24 gauge wire and soldering it on there so that it's long enough depending on your frame size, so it has a custom fit. Now you can use the wire off the old capacitor if you don't have any extra wire laying around. Now you can get small spools of wire, you can get your acid lead-free flux, you can get your silver bearing lead-free solder, and your little 6-inch sections of shrink tubing, all from Radio Shack. So if you have that locally, then you're in luck and you can get all that stuff, and including capacitors. So it's all cheap and easy to find if you have a local electronics store like that. Now, so say you pull out your coils, and like he said, there's a 47 and it's a liner. Now, a large capacitor on a short stroke is not so bearing important as it is not to have a small capacitor on a large stroke, because that holds back power, whereas a larger capacitor is going to take in and that's going to cut off before it ever gets full. So it's not really as important, but you can still do it. Changing capacitor is not going to change the speed a lot. It's going to change it a very small amount. What it really does is fine-tunes the coils so that you're getting maximum power out of them, which gives you maximum hit and strength, and less voltage needs to be used, yada yada yada. Without going off into that rabbit hole, let's focus more on just doing this swap out. Just leave it to that. As far as the first thing you're going to do is strip off these little extra heat shrink sleeves they have on the end here. So you'll just slice this. Okay. Take that off. Alright, so now you can see how they solder that there. You do the same thing to the back one. Like I said, if you don't have a little extra piece of wire that's the same size that you need, you'll just salvage this capacitor wire. There may even be, a lot of times they'll have wires soldered on to that capacitor that they use to extend it, and you can just use that. The wire that goes on the capacitor is usually pretty stiff as compared to the copper wire, which is a lot more flexible and easy to work with. Okay, so once you got these little heat shrink sleeves off, now you need to remove it. This is your tool. Now, if you have a soldering iron, that's great. You don't need to go spend up to $40 for one. If you can get a $15 one and that's fine for your budget, then do it. But I'm going to show you something else. You really don't even need to go that far. Another thing they have at Radio Shack is solder tape. It's a little half-inch long ribbon. It's about a 1/4 inch or less wide, maybe a half-inch long. You can actually wrap that around and then heat it, and it melts right into place. If you don't have that, another thing you do, if you at least you gotta have some solder. So I mean, another thing you can do is heat solder up, hold it up like up above the ground, like probably about 4 feet up, and then when it goes like that, then you have a puddle. Okay, so now you can take that piece, and just like those ribbons that you can buy, now you have a piece that you can wrap around the wire, and then when you heat it, it melts into place. And you don't even need a soldering iron to do that. Alright, so you just heat these up. Once they're hot enough, solder pops, comes off. Okay. So now we need to put on the proper one. Now what I want you to do at this point is you can trim these, like I said, so that you have a custom fit. Thing with this leg, it's probably too short for this frame, so you'd have to extend it. Well, that one will work. The back one, probably a tiny bit too long, but it can just be shoved in there. If it's really, really long, like I said, they make them all the same, so it depends on which machine those coils came out of. You might have tons of wire on there, then you'll need to trim it down and make it neat so it just fits the frame to going to the point of the post and no more, just so it's nice and neat. So after you got that cleaned up, now you're going to put on the other capacitor. So you'll want to take that and likewise make it fit. Now you have two different types. This is the axial. Think of this wire as an axle. And this is a radial coming out of the radius. Okay. Depending on which one you use, it will depend on how much wire you're going to need, how much you're going to have to extend. Like if I were to put this right here, I have to put on a great big piece of wire to make it reach all the way here, run behind this, and come back here so that I can make it all nice and neat. Unless you like having wires and capacitors laying all over the fucking place, that's on you. However you fucking come up with your design, wire the fucking thing up, get it to the length you need it. Okay, slip on the freaking shrink tubing, get it all trimmed up and made to size. Okay, so with this one, I soldered on a tiny little piece of wire onto here so that it is the proper length. Now you have a marking, there's a negative arrow pointing this way. Okay, so this one is negative. On the radial, one leg will have the black marking. So that's the negative leg. Negative leg, okay. Some people will tell you that the negative end has to go to the front. Well, if the negative end has to go to the front and your power supply is a DC power supply, direct current, your clip cord actually has a positive and a negative. Now you can take a meter, put it on DC, turn on your power supply. Okay, so when we touch this, it actually says 7.3. Whatever. Okay, if I switch these legs, now it says negative 7.3. So that means these are backwards. That means this leg is the positive side. If you mark it, now you'll know which leg is positive. Okay? I'll show you what that has to do with anything. So, since certain people who like to steal everything I've ever done and remake all my videos have explained that it must go negative to the front post. Well, let's say you take this and you switch it around. Now your negative is in a different position, your positive's on a different leg. Well, here's how current works. The electrons in the current flow from positive to negative. So if you can switch that clipboard, you're switching the current, so your machine is still going to run, right? So I guess it doesn't have to be any certain direction. Your capacitor is not going to fucking explode if you have the clipboard on wrong. It will only pop if you try putting 30 volts through a 25 volt rated capacitor. Most capacitors you're going to see in machines are 25 volts to 65 volts or some shit. No power supply is going to put out over 65 volts, so let alone more than maybe 17, and you're never going to use that, so don't worry about all that shit. The direction, I usually have my wires, my capacitors running towards down. It can go up or down. If you have it up, then you want to put the, like I said, find your positive and your negative. Not that any of this is like super important, but you put your negative leg here so that you can put your positive down here, negative up here. Because, like I said, power runs from positive to negative. So if it's going to go this way, through this coil, through that coil, up to here, make contact, and then go to here. It's going from positive to negative. That's the flow of the power. Your capacitor is a bridge. That's all it's going to do. Doesn't matter which direction it goes because you can change your clip cord. So if it's the negative is pointing up, then put your positive up. If the arrow's pointing down, put your positive down, because that's where the electrons are flowing, from positive to negative. Okay, so now that dumbass fucking explanation is out of the way, you got your shit soldered up, makes it fit, okay? You double check it, everything fits the way you want it to, nice and neat. Okay, that goes there, that goes there. Everything's hidden behind the wires. Everything's nice, super custom neat. You don't see any extra bullshit unless that's what you want. If you want wires wherever, fucking knock yourself out. Once you got your fit done, now you can start soldering shit. So at this point, I would take these back out and I would prep everything and solder it together. Now, as far as that goes, this is when you take your lugs, okay? You want to use this type of solder. Saves you tons of fucking time, okay? You want to use, you're always going to find this lead-free silver bearing solder. And of course, one of these two types of ways to do that. Now, what I would typically do is you'll put your This is nasty acid. This is actually like hydrochloric acid, so it's pretty nasty. So put it on here, okay? Get it on your lugs. Get it on every bare, and if you use stripped down copper wire, make sure you get that enamel scraped off. Okay, so all the points where wire is at. So I got to put it on here. Now I got to put it also on these wires, wherever there's bare wires. In this case, say you're just going to use your other coils. Clean that crap off. Okay, clean. Put the new flux on. Clean. Put some more flux on. Alright, so everything's prepped and ready to attach. Okay, so what you would do at this point is you need to get this wire and this wire, and you're going to solder them together. Now you can try getting all three of these things put together at once, but it's a lot easier to solder these 2 points together and then lay them on top of the lug together and then solder it on there. Okay, so I'm going to heat up my iron and then I'll show you that. Okay, so you got your tip hot. Like I said, unless you're going to just use a solder, then I would just wrap that piece around these two. Shut up, Yippee. Okay, take your ribbon. Like I said, they have solder ribbon at the Radio Shack. And it's kind of like a prison style of electronics. Okay, so that's all you gotta do, and then they're freaking soldered together. Or if you're gonna use a soldering iron, you want this because you need something to hold your wires together so you don't burn your fingers. So you pull your sleeves back so that you can, expose them. Hold these together so they're touching each other almost. Hold these two together using some kind of metal object. Razor blade's the easiest. Okay, so now they're next to each other, and now you can do your soldering. Reason to do this is so that you have these two wires together and you're not trying to do three things at once. So at this point, and it's always easier, another thing I should have showed you was if you put a little bit of solder on each leg, okay, and then on, say like here, if you prime after you put the acid on each point and then put a little solder on each one, now they're all ready to go. A little faster. Just makes everything a little faster. Okay, so now these two are soldered together. Now I'm going to lay them on top of here. Now as far as your surface goes, you want to use hard wood. Obviously you don't want plastic, that's going to melt. Glass is good. Plastic and metal you don't want to use. Metal is a conductor and it will just suck all the heat right out. You'll never fucking get your solder to melt. Okay, so I'm using this to hold that down. Hold it down for a second until it cools. Okay, boom. Now, I'm going to do the same thing to the front. You always want to get your surfaces down on the ground. Okay, again, use the blade to hold it because heat hurts. Okay, solder those together. Once they're together, they're not moving around. Okay. Put a little solder on my lug. Now I'm going to lay the lug on top. The wire's on top of the lug. Hold it with the edge of the blade. Hit it with the soldering iron. It all melts together. Let it cool. You'll see it change color. Done. Now, you can take a certain size of this shit that's just big enough to fit over here and then heat shrink it down to cover this point. A lot of people like that ghetto look where those lugs aren't covered. Whatever. I prefer to cover them because if you have like a bare metal frame, you know, if your frame doesn't have a bunch of powder coating, then you have a chance of it touching and shorting out. You got to grab that. Alright, so this is what I usually use. Instead of the heat shrink, it gives it a more custom look. This is the sports tape. It's fabric. You want to cut it in the shape of a elongated triangle. Okay. The reason is, this is quick, cheap, fast, and it looks custom. Take the long end like this, and you lay it like that, so it just goes over the surface. Pinch that back. Roll that, and because it's at this angle, every time you go around, it's going to wrap down a little bit more. And now you have it covered. You don't have to worry about shorting out. It looks custom. Quick, clean, easy, cheap. You can use anything you might have laying around for a tape. It all depends on what you want it to look like. If you want to use the shrink tubing, remember this size, you're going to have